Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Trader Talk Radio UK. Welcome to Jeff, and good morning to you, mate.
G'day, dude. How you going, everyone? Hope you're having a wonderful time. It's afternoon here, and I've just lit the fire. It's going to be a cool night.
Gosh, I can't imagine people lighting fires in Australia.
Yeah, well, we're down near the Antarctic, where I am.
All right.
So it does get cool in winter. That's no doubt about that.
Cool in winter and very hot in the summer.
No.
Oh, doesn't it?
That's why I'm here. No, it's lovely, mild. Gets to it can get up into the 30s.
All right.
For a few days during the summer, but generally around about the mid-20s, which is absolutely glorious.
Does it rain a lot?
Only in winter.
Okay, so it's not like the UK. It's not like a similar climate to the UK, or is it? Does it have similarities?
No, not at all. No, we've got. Well, I suppose it does in that when winter's here, it's here.
Yeah,
It really is. It is miserable, but the summers, just gorgeous.
Okay. Well, we have an interesting last day of the month kicking off really right now. We got FTSE 100, which is just coming off the highs of yesterday a little bit. It's actually coming off a weekly pivot and just below the daily pivot right now, but slightly confusing chart really going on right at this particular moment. The fact that the structure is really here for this trend, so for this trend to start to break to the opposite direction, it's going to have to break above and this particular point and hold, probably a little bit higher actually, maybe that point there, break above and hold it up there. But there is something of what was support here, so that might be the point where this chart starts to turn again to the upside. And by all intents and purposes, it was certainly looking like that was going to be the case. We had a decent run into the back end of yesterday. The back end of the FTSE's hours, and in the US session as well. There was right up until the US session, we had a decent close with the FTSE, specifically the FTSE futures, not so much the S&P, but the FTSE futures closing there. But interestingly, this dollar yen, which I did put a trade call out on a few days ago, has started to move to the downside now. So that's there for everybody to manage. I think my price was 72, which is about that point there. Funnily enough, my price was going to be higher than that, but because it started to move on the day before, I didn't think we were going to get it, but we did. Stop was up here, so I'll have to check back on that. But 37. So we're almost at a break-even trade if people want to start taking profits on that. I quite like the thought actually of giving people the entries and letting them manage it themselves. But
build themselves, yeah.
Yeah, take it from there, because otherwise it starts to get kind of confusing and there seems to be a lot. There's a lot to focus on after that. If you're kind of having to manage the trade and everything else. So everybody can look at the trade in their own way and start to manage it. I'm just trying to see where it was that I put in here.
Way into this myself, really, and I just couldn't find my happy hunting ground for this one.
Yeah, difficult one. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I'll just make sure that my thing here is right. Yeah, dollar yen sell 72 and 1206. I'm just double checking whether we've got a break even already. 1206, about there. Good thing I think with this one is that if we can break through these lows, we can start actually moving these stops down a little bit as well. 34. Yeah, so there's a break-even trade already.
Nice.
If profits taken, but actually it could be slightly better, because you could take the break-even and actually move this down just to secure a little bit of profit on the trade. So that one's going in the right direction. Gold was the other one that I was interested in yesterday as well, and 81 was the price that I was looking at. Actually, I should have put that one out. I didn't put a trade call on that one out. But this one still could be entered, and maybe the trade call can go out later on. That's the 81 level. My slight issue now with gold would be that it's broken. It broke to the downside before holding this area. But in saying that, it did manage to hold a trend line along here. So I think some decisions might have to be made on this one, because with something like this, if it breaks below the area that that becomes where I would expect it to hold. Actually, this one looks all right. Let's not confuse matters. This one looks absolutely fine. So gold is the other one that I quite like. It may be interesting that there's almost 2 points of protection now going out with gold and the yen. And the one that we were talking about yesterday also in the free show is the Aussie yen, which you've just informed me is starting to move to the downside as well.
Yep, sure is.
So quite a lot out there actually, which suggests, aside from anything else, that that there is some protection being put into place. So Aussie obviously being more kind of associated with risk on, yen associated with risk off. So yen moving to the upside against the dollar, moving to the upside against the Aussie. Haven't checked it against the other currencies, but we can check that in a moment. And gold also moving to the upside, not significantly, but certainly it has happened. And that brings us really back to the FTSE, which a little bit, as I say, a little bit tricky here. I think to choose which way we're going to start in the morning, even though we're starting to see those slightly protectionist currencies and commodities coming into play. The FTSE is in a little bit of I think a confusing kind of area here. It's in a range. That's the way that I would see this right now. It's a little bit questionable, I suppose, and I could make an argument for upside certainly, but I could also make an argument for downside, and that is really indicative of a range, and that's what we have here. So we just got this range kind of going on. Daily pivot could hold it up. We could bash our heads against the weekly pivot. Interesting, really, yesterday that we hit that weekly pivot eventually, but it took a pretty decent dip really before we started to spring forward again, but because it looked like it was going to see the weekly pivot quite early on in the day, but that didn't happen. Weakened, but then strengthened. Weekly pivots held it up, and now the daily pivot could act as a little bit of a kind of springboard to kind of trap us in here. But as I say, we are in this range. It's the last day of the month. Aussie's weakening, yen strengthening, gold strengthening. It kind of suggests that we're probably more likely to see the FTSE weaker than stronger today. Again, we got to look for a catalyst. It's probably to do with the Fed, which is tomorrow, which suggests at this particular stage anyway that moves to the downside may be subdued. So I'm not too sure whether this is going to go, but it may, just because it's the last day of the month as well. We have to kind of consider that that factor. I think I'd probably be more comfortable suggesting that we hold in this area, and then tomorrow is the time that we're likely to see the easing happen. So that's those really, mate. The only other one that I was looking at with a bit of interest was this euro pound, which I still really like for downside. There's a couple of.
I took a trade this morning on that.
You took a trade to the downside on euro pound.
Yeah, so it's right on entry now. Okay,
great. All right. Well, in that case, let's hand over to you for the euro pound, because I like this one for downside, and just I suppose very, very quickly. The euro pound is in a downtrend. We've got a monthly level here, which has been broken to the downside. Break to the downside, and it's a bit rangy, but it is to the downside on this particular support line. Then we kind of shift down the gears a little bit. The weekly structure is still in place. The weekly structure is a little bit lower down here. So the downtrend is still in play on the weekly. The daily is questionable. We maybe have a break to the upside. It depends if you see this as a range, and I think you probably would look at it more as a box range than anything else. And we're kind of at the higher end of that box range to my mind. So the moves to the upside on the daily would suggest to me that we've got every chance of making it all the way down here to 0.8490. So I think if we can break these lows, mate, that this has got some room to travel to the downside, and regardless of whether this goes up or not, I suppose that might hold it up. But regardless of whether this goes up or not, there's certainly more room to the downside than there is to the upside if we consider this upper line here. But I'm going to pass over to you because I like this one for lower prices, and I could certainly make my case for it for lower prices. That looks to me like a line in the sand as well. I'm not sure whether you've drawn that particular line, but that looks to me like the line in the sand. I think the 4 hour is still okay structurally as well. And there's a few pivots in the way is the only other thing, isn't it? But let's have a look.
Yes,
What
that is a bit of an issue, to be
yes,
fair. And I've had to go pretty loose on my stop here.
let's have a look.
I've had to go pretty loose on my stop here because of the technical issues that do surround this. And really the main one for mine is this trend line. That's the main worry. Well, it's not really worry because it's resistance, but it could put us into being behind the 8 ball for a little bit. And I was very tempted to wait until that had actually happened to actually get into this trade. But I thought, when I looked at the chart, seeing, a lot of the things that you're seeing as well, but primarily when I go to the weekly chart, I see this big tweezer top sitting here at a support level formerly, but obviously now looking for that to be resistance, and it's just too hard to ignore, really. They're sitting there like the proverbial DBs. So I had to take those into consideration, and then I thought, well, daily doesn't look that good, but the 4 hour is going to give me an opportunity here as a potential lower high. And that was the candle there that I wanted to trade. This one here, the spinning top, put that in a little bit of a quandary, really. But I decided to go through with the trade anyway and just get my stops above the trend line and above these little bit of noisy highs over here. And seeing exactly what you're seeing, of course, there's a big gap underneath us if we can break through this support level. And that, of course, is the big question. It is, well, 2 pivots we had to go through. We're kind of through one, but not. And the second, the daily pivot, of course, is doing what the daily pivot does best, and that is holding up the market at the first attempt. So I can totally see this trend line having a test, and therefore I hope if that's the case, it does become resistance, and we do see this fall away. In terms of the relative prospects of both the euro and the pound, if I go to the euro is at a resistance level, which, if I back off a little bit here, is pretty much these 2 lows that it got through late last week, or was it Wednesday of last week, and it looked like it was going to just tear off and away she goes. But really, this is the retest area that you would expect to happen, because that was the breakout area, and really that's what's happening right now. We've not only retested it, we've probably broken back above it, and now we're looking to do exactly the same on the downside. Too hard to pick here for me. We are at a resistance level. If you go to the 4 hour chart, you can see that trend line, and it was that I was talking about this morning in this morning's show. If I go a little bit wider, I don't know if I've got that other trend line on the 4 hour chart. I haven't, but there's a daily trend line coming through here. And my quandary was, which is going to provide the bigger resistance? Is it going to be this confluence area of daily pivot, weekly pivot, and the 4 hour trend line? Or is it going to be this daily trend line, which maybe doesn't even have a lot of confluence? So I chose this one, and I thought, okay, well, this one will do me, but I haven't got a trade here. And the only other thing that I see is this double bottom sitting here on the 4 hour chart. Be looking for a higher low if I was to be thinking long here. So I'm still of a bearish outlook on the euro. And of course, if you go to the pound, I don't see that as as strong a resistance level as where the euro is. Yes, it's a trend line, no question, and we haven't got through it. But that bar there was pretty encouraging. This one, not so much. As we look to the open in about 9 minutes, I think we'll probably get a fair idea as to what's going to happen here today. Same sort of scenario as the euro, but as I said, I don't think the resistance level is as strong as where the euro sits. I think there's a little bit of upside here in the pound to get to these levels here, maybe. And of course, the trend line, which is on a bigger picture than we saw on the euro. So I'm thinking here for the pound, and I think the euro is at the resistance level that can turn it around. That's hence euro pound short makes a lot of sense to me as well. So that's it for that cross. We are going to struggle here to get through there. There's no question about that. Whether we do it on this attempt or we have to go to this trend line to find the next resistance level, of course, is the big question of the day. Speaking of which, the Aussie has suffered under the weight of Chinese bad production numbers.
Oh.
When I say bad,
Yeah, tell me about that, mate.
often,
I didn't know. I'm not up on
well,
that.
they're a miss, but they're not a bad miss. They're only point something. I guess the worrying aspect of that is when you're talking PMIs and you're getting down to 50.1, you're getting pretty close to that contraction level, I suppose. And I guess that trend, which seems to be in place, is continuing, and I guess that's why it's not very good for the market.
Yeah, I think they're all quite interesting numbers, aren't they? Because none of them were positive. Manufacturing PMI, non-manufacturing PMI, casing manufacturing PMI. That's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and they do call for these numbers to actually be quite an important metric for the state of the potential slowdown. They say it's quite an important metric for that. So maybe we start to see the numbers filter in over the next month of being a little bit weaker. Quarter number 2 could be a bit weaker, and you have to wonder when we get such poor results in May and June from the markets. I mean, I don't know. I know statistically that those results end up being poor, as in the prices usually end up being poor in the markets. And you have to kind of consider that is that because historically we've had worse numbers out of the second quarter for many of the things that could drive the second quarter, and China being one of them. Why is it that the Aussie is so weak in May? And is it because the Chinese data actually starts to weaken in the second quarter historically, or is it something else? I don't know that, but maybe
if that is the case, then that would be a reason, no question. Certainly a
yes,
factor.
yeah,
No doubt about that.
Well,
because,
so I see.
As
So
we
yeah,
all know, Chinese sneeze and Australia catches a cold.
yeah, and I guess it's starting to be the case for the rest of the world as well. So that's really important. Those numbers are really important.
Yeah, look, I think they could have been worse. They could have been below 50, and then I think the Aussie would be even further down than it is right now.
Yeah, and I think the futures
it's the trend. It's the trend that's the issue, and I haven't had a look at the graph actually. We might take a look at that.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, well, Spanish PMI is due to be released as well. Sorry, Spanish GDP is due to be released as well in the next 5 minutes. So maybe that'll give us a bit of a clearer direction of the markets this morning too.
Yep. Okay. Actually, I didn't realise that the month before. That can't be right.
What are we looking at?
That's not what I just read. I'm looking at this graph on manufacturing PMI out of China. It's saying that February and March. Oh no, here we are. I'm reading the forecast versus the. Well, I was saying the trend is down, but really, last month was not a bad result given the previous 3.
Absolutely, yeah, and that caught me on the hop, I have to say, because I was looking for that to be another weaker month, and looking for the FTSE 100 actually to sell, and that didn't happen because we had that jump. So
yeah, it popped. Yeah.
You're right, very very interesting. But maybe this is the thing about I guess these anomalies, isn't it? When we look at that graph that you've got up there, maybe last month there was a bit of an anomaly, and actually all we've done is kind of he's had a little bit of a reversal, but we're going to be starting to trend in the same direction, and we start to see that weakness filter through over the next coming months.
Yeah, March last year was on par. and February a bad miss. But yeah, since June, so pretty much the whole financial year, apart
Yeah.
from that one there, has been
Yeah.
a pretty bad result, very bad result, in fact. If you read that into it, yes, okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know where that goes from here. To be fair, at the last day of the month, I'm tending to think reverse psychology, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Let me take a look at this chart, which is the month of April and the relative strength of all the G7 currencies against the US dollar. So you can see the strongest against the dollar in April has been the euro. Mid-range, absolutely mid-range, is the Aussie. So if you compare that to what really was a weak yen throughout the month until now, there's a very strong case for you, and you're short on Aussie yen, I would have thought, Ash. But then I start to think, okay, well, if the Swissie's been the weakest currency and the Kiwi's been the second weakest currency against the dollar, then surely the people who have been selling these two against the dollar are going to take profit today. Or yesterday, or the day before, coming into the last day of the month. Surely there's going to be profit taking. So I kind of get the impression when I look at the chart that, okay, this looks bad, but there's potentially going to be a little bit of an easing in that let's call it sickness. There might be a little bit of repertory work. So that's kind of how I look at the end of the month. But that's exactly what I'm not seeing at the moment. Going back to, I haven't got a Kiwi dollar chart up. Bugger. I don't want to go fishing for one, to be fair. But let me go back to that chart and see if I can do another analogy. I had a Euro Swissy chart, didn't I? So Euro strong, Swissy weak throughout the month. That's probably a good example. Euro Swissy. So if we're looking at the daily chart, you can see how clear that is, that the Euro's been just outperforming the Swissy like no tomorrow. And we've had a retracement for whatever reason, maybe just because there was profit taking there, I don't know. But now we look like returning to trend towards the end of the month. I've got the logical thought process that tells me this is not going to continue, and we are going to get some selling coming in today, just because there's a profit to be taken here. That's kind of where my thought process lies towards the end of the month. So if I'm looking like going with trend, I'm probably doing the wrong thing, if you know what I mean. So I take that into today's trading, and I think, okay, Aussie's been pretty weak for the entire month. In fact, well, actually, it didn't start the month badly, but it's certainly come off big time in the second half or the latter part of the month. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
So am I thinking short here to continue that trend? And the answer is no, I'm not. But can I go long is the next question. And I need a reason to do that. And at the moment, I haven't got it. So on that particular cross, the answer is no. Going to tours, if you like, and getting rid of that bias, I can't really find anything that I'm super happy to trade at the moment. Everything's kind of gone, not necessarily in the direction I thought it might, to be fair. And for that reason, I think there's probably opportunities later on when the market settles down and we find that the 30-minute charts are actually looking a little bit different. Like I'm seeing now, the moves we've seen of the last couple of hours are starting to ease off a little bit on a lot of these currency pairs. So I'm kind of looking a little bit later on. Do you want to have a look at the open, mate?
I'm watching the open actually. I've just put a little order in for gold as well, which I've put out to the group. 1282, stop at 1277.25. So hopefully it'll come back.
Yeah, I'm looking at the gold chart now myself, and I said in the show last night that if I saw this happen, exactly this, that I'd be on board as well. And there's absolutely no reason why I shouldn't be. But my price is up here because I'm a cause and effect guy rather than a, okay, I think it's going there, let's trade it.
Sure.
So I'm not going to override yours, that's for sure. But I can totally see monthly pivot here and this confluence area. It'll have to get a wriggle on, of course, if it's going there today. But that's stranger things have happened, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm on board with you. I think gold is a buy. I don't think I'd like to be hanging on to a major part of the trade through here. I think that's probably an excellent place to have a look for it to turn around and go to trend. But each to his own, I suppose. I think that's my thought process on gold. I think it's, yes, long to the trend line and take profit there of some substance, I would have thought. What's oil doing, mate?
Well, interesting
Flying
article
to each
actually
other.
yesterday on oil that oil's impact on the world economy could be pretty extreme if we get to $100 a barrel, and still seems like a little ways off from doing that, obviously. But
What was it there last time?
I beg your pardon?
Has it ever been there?
Yeah, $100 a barrel. Yeah, back
Oh
in
shit! Yeah, also.
2013. Yeah, I remember those days. Interesting though with oil, because when we look at the WTI on the monthly chart here, we actually see that it is at a fairly significant price point, and if we're just looking at the technical levels, then there's a chance that we have actually come off that point as well. So it does show that the 66.25 does seem to be a point or a line in the sand, if you like. So I wouldn't be surprised to see oil come off a little bit here today.
Show your chart, mate. I haven't got your chart.
Oh, you've not? Okay. Let's do this. There we go. Yeah, this is the monthly chart here, and this 96.25 looks to be a line in the sand somewhere around that area anyway, and oil has bounced away from that particular point. So when we look at the rest of the picture with oil, looking at the weekly chart, then a pretty strong rejection bar up here, and that does suggest that I think some weakness up here with oil would be more than achievable. So I think oil from this point would not be a buying opportunity, and it would suggest that some easing back to the downside is more likely from what I see with the charts here. Daily chart as well. Now let's just have a quick look at these lines here.
Shall I ask you a question in a minute about oil?
No problem. Okay, so we got that, and we have got that. Yeah, that's through, isn't it? That does suggest that we could see some weakness here with oil. Let me just double check this on the setup timeframes. And there's a bit of a flurry, but I would suggest that this point here would be achievable. A head and shoulders is going to be maybe harder to achieve now. Well, there is a neckline there as well, so possibly moving into this area here. I don't know whether I've done the statistical evidence on oil, so I'd have to check whether I've done any evidence on oil to see what the next month holds. And if I haven't done it, then I will do it before I was looking for a bias, a directional bias. But yeah, I think moving into 64 would be a really good area to try and look for some downside with oil. And particularly if that did complete that head and shoulders pattern. This is 50 bars along, so it's almost 2 months that we're waiting. That leads us over here. I mean, really takes us into June. So
No, I've just got to duck off for 2 secs. I'll be right back.
you go ahead, mate. Yeah. So that would take us into June, looking at if this does become some sort of head and shoulders pattern, but there's no guarantee of that. So I suppose we're still looking for easing to the upside right now, but I wouldn't be looking for much upside probabilities here before looking for some downside with oil. And it certainly appears that it certainly appears that this is weakening somewhat. But how deep the retracement comes and whether it can pick back up again is to a degree anybody's guess. Now, if this head and shoulders is to work out, then all we would do here is wait for it to get up to that price of around about. Let's bring it in. Get up to a price of somewhere around about 64.20, and then look for selling opportunities there, taking some profit at the lows down here. And it would be irrelevant whether the head and shoulders was to work out there or not, because that is a point of support. So we look to take profit down there at the support line and then see if it goes through. But the measured move on this particular pattern would not be that deep. So it doesn't look like it would be coming down that far just to the trend line. And then pushing back up again. So that would suggest that maybe the head and shoulders is less likely, and what we're much more likely to get is some sort of lower high here, and then drifting back to the downside, and then start looking for upside. But I'd want to do some statistical evidence, as I say, on that, just to check what the seasonal aspect of oil is over the coming days and over the coming months, just to give us a clearer picture and a clearer view. So yeah, bit of weakness with oil. As I say, I was reading something about $100 a barrel being really dangerous for the market. Let me see if I can find that. Other news actually out there while I look for that is that Theresa May is facing some further defections, if you like, challenges from the grassroots Tories over Brexit, because they are another group who could put some pressure on her to be ousted. And the way that they would do that effectively is by pledging their support for Nigel Farage and his Brexit team rather than Theresa May. And there's 70 of these grassroots leaders, these council leaders, have signed a petition saying that they no longer believe in Theresa May because of the way she's handled Brexit. So that could put a lot of pressure on her. Now, that doesn't mean that she has to leave, but it does mean that that she might be forced to rethink her position a little bit more closely. Because she would be losing support really from the foundations of the party. So Theresa May is under some pressure. Labour also are looking for a bit of a directional bias on what they're going to do in their European election campaign, because Labour may well start calling for a second referendum as they go into the European elections. Now, the Tories aren't putting up European candidates at this moment in time, saying that they want to try and get this deal done before the European elections. But I think that is pretty short-sighted, and that probably will change at some point. But Labour's position is the interesting one, because if Labour go out and say that they will be looking for a second referendum as they enter into the European elections, then that is going to be their party's position going forward, and that may well see them over the line, and it might give them a true opposition to Nigel Farage's Brexit party. If they don't, then the votes are likely to be split on from the British public on the view of how we go and challenge these European elections, because the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, Labour as well and the new party Change UK would all be fighting the European elections on this Remain position, fighting on a platform of Remain. Yet people will have to kind of like be splitting their vote between the three parties, whereas there's one Brexit party really right now, and that is a party called the Brexit Party by Nigel Farage. So it's going to be a lot more difficult for the Remain candidates to win, probably. But if Labour, a big gun, was to come out and support a referendum and support remaining in the EU off the back of that effectively, then I think we might see a slightly different battle. So things could get quite interesting in the next few weeks and the next few days. So we need to hear from Labour to see what position they're going to take. I think most of the membership would like Labour to run on the Brexit referendum campaign and platform, but unfortunately the leadership, i.e. Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, they're Brexiteers really. So I'm not sure whether they're going to bend on that fact or not. There might be enough pressure for them to do so, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen. So whether that affects the pound is a little bit of a question. I suspect somewhere along the line there'll be some sort of stories that will, and we'll see what happens with Nigel Farage getting into the European Parliament again. But he's won it before, so I wouldn't be surprised if he does pretty well again. Now that's only a few weeks away.
Is that the elections?
Yes, yes. Now that
When are they?
End of May, I think it's from memory. It's the 22nd, but
Wow, it's all happening. Ours is the 18th.
Oh, really?
Yeah, federal elections. Yeah, absolutely.
Let me actually put in 2019.
That could rock the boat a bit as well.
Yeah, well, for you guys.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
held between the 23rd and 26th of May. But there's going to be a manifesto that's going to be published way before that, so we should get a fairly decent look on what Labour's position is going to be way before that. Obviously, they're going to have to fight on a specific platform, so it's going to be interesting to see which platform they fight on. Are they going to fight on the referendum campaign platform, or are they going to leave that to one side? Because that really does mean, I think, that the Brexit Party are much more likely to gain the most seats, because they at least have a clear message, whereas the clear message is really coming from so many different parties for the Remain side. And I think Vince Cable, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who've always been a pro-European party, I think wanted to try and fight these elections as in collaboration with some other parties, but apparently the other parties weren't forthcoming with an agreement on that, and I think that's a mistake. And that's some of the problem. That's some of the problem that we have with all this stuff, is that unfortunately, where there is a lot of rhetoric about the broader picture of Brexit and people fighting on the broader picture of Brexit, there is still kind of political wranglings and political interest in everything that's going on here, and people are fighting for their own political reasons, and it does split the vote. Nigel Farage has got one reason to be in Parliament, or one reason to be in politics, and one reason alone, and it makes the message so much easier for people to understand, and so much clearer for people to understand. But these other parties, they're fighting Brexit, but then they're also fighting to get into Parliament and into Westminster. And it may be quite interesting.
I would have thought.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I would have thought that the public in general would have been just so over what the politicians have dished up to them in the last 2 years that there would be mass exodus in terms of if the sitting member, for instance, was challenged. I think there'd be just a protest vote, wouldn't there?
Mass exodus against who?
Any one of them, because they've just stuffed it up completely.
Yeah,
Brexit, I'm talking about in particular.
Yeah, well, no, Theresa May is facing a huge kind of political opposition within her own grassroots element. So there is an exodus, because actually what's happening with her is that her grassroots are basically saying to her, "You've stuffed this up. You've messed Brexit up to the point that we will now back Nigel Farage's party." So anybody that wants Brexit will vote for the Brexit party. They won't vote for the Tories because they've messed it up so much. They won't vote for Labour because they're so flappy. And really the only other option is the Brexit party, which is Nigel Farage's lot. And this is the issue, because at least he's got a clear message and pretty much no opposition and no other contenders that could take his mantle. They're not going to take him on, so he's much more likely to win because the other parties are so kind of divided on how they're approaching everything, and there's so many other parties all fighting on the same platform of Remain. There's too many in a way, so it's the lack of concentration for that particular stance means that Nigel Farage is much more likely to win. Now, back in 2012, I think it was, when we had a general election, Nigel Farage stood in a seat called South Thanet, and the Conservatives were incredibly worried about Nigel Farage getting into Westminster and becoming an MP. So they blocked him. You know, they did everything. They put all their money into South Thanet, and right across the country, you know, they fought a fair and just fight. But in that particular area, they didn't fight a just fight. You know, they really did take him on, and they won, and they stopped him getting into Westminster. Now, in some respects, that has probably been worse for the moderates than better. Because even though they stopped him getting into a seat in the MP, it meant that his focus only ever became back onto Europe and not onto making his party a party that could be voted for national reasons as well. You know, with national policies. So actually, you know, a lot of this stuff I think has been pretty badly managed and pretty misjudged. But right now, Nigel Farage is in a very, very strong position to win these European elections.
By default, but as you say, at least he's got an agenda, and the others, I don't know. I don't know how to describe them.
The others have an agenda, but the problem is their agenda is diluted by their other agendas that are to do with the national politics. And that's what I'm saying. You see, Nigel Farage doesn't have a diluted agenda. His is just about Europe, because he didn't win a Westminster seat. Whereas the other, you know, the Green Party are in Westminster, the Liberal Democrats are in Westminster, obviously Labour in Westminster. So, you know, they're all fighting for other reasons as well as Change UK. They're all fighting for other reasons as well as the EU battle. So it's looking pretty gloomy, mate, I have to say, unless Labour come out and say we will back a second referendum. I think that is the only hope that a major party may well be able to take on Nigel Farage in the European elections, because he will create all merry hell in there.
Yeah. I wonder what that will do to currencies across the planet. We'll see.
Well, I'm not sure what it will do to currencies, but I'll tell you what it will do. It will, what it will do to currencies, I suppose, as a direct result of him getting in. I'm not sure whether there'll be that much movement, but I think what he will do is create certain things in there that will ultimately have an effect on the currencies. You know, there'll be all these little side stories going on. And he'll create problems. You think about I don't know how many MPs that each party gets in there, or MEPs they get in there, but if he wins a decent amount of seats, anything that the European Union start to try and bring through as another policy, he can probably get pretty close to blocking with a little bit more support from, you know, some other MEPs, and he will try and do that. He really will cause all manner of problems in there.
All very interesting. I was going to ask you a question about oil.
Yes.
Last time, when was it? 2013, you said, when it was over $1 a barrel.
$100, yeah.
$100, sorry.
Yeah.
Now I'm talking bargains. What, if you can remember, was the price of fuel at the pump in Brighton?
Oh, do you know what? From memory, I think it was near about £1.50, and it's currently around about £1.20.
Okay, so let's say 20% less.
Yeah.
Than it currently is.
Yeah.
Sorry, 20% more than it currently is.
Yes, more. Yeah, yeah.
There's 20% less now, and the price is over 40% less, or let's say 40% less. How does that work?
Well,
given that inflation, there's no inflation.
Okay, let me just tell you what it was.
There's only one answer, and it's the oil companies profiting.
Yes.
In my mind. So there's no, there's no technical reason. There's no way to, that we can trade this, right? That's where I'm coming from. It's not a tradable thing. So it doesn't make sense in market terms to me. And that's why I say it can only be the oil companies who are just taking profits where they may.
I'm just actually looking here, mate. Actually, the price of oil and there is a slightly different metric that obviously we have to consider here, that the price of oil, the price at the pump, on average, the UK petrol price is up from 134 to 135. That was in June of 2013, I believe. But what we have to, and this is going to be June 2013. Yeah, so that would have been relevant, wouldn't it? Oh no, actually it wouldn't. It was starting to drop. Yeah, 2014, 2013. Yeah, so that would have been relevant. So the other thing we have to consider with that is that if we also go back, I mean, let's bring this up on the chart here. You still got my chart here, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So WTI back in.
I've got another chart. I don't know what it is. I can't see.
This one here?
Now I've got you. Yep.
Yeah. So but back in 2013, sorry, back in 2008, oil was up at 140 a barrel, which is crazy, right? $140 a barrel. Now it's but in 2000 and right from 2011 through to 2014, it was $100 a barrel. However, we can't really take a binary equation from that, because now if we look at the price of the pound, back in 2014 the price of the pound was 170, so we would have been buying it for a lot cheaper as well.
Yeah.
So we'd have to do a pretty slightly more complex equation to know whether it equates. Where does it all equate to where we are now? But don't get me wrong. There's no doubt about it. The price of oil changes to the upside, and you go to the petrol station the next morning, and it's more expensive. The price of oil changes to the downside, and it takes a week or a month for them to change the price. So it's all going to be in the favour of the petrol stations.
And never that will that ever change?
No.
Do you in the UK have regulations or a body that actually monitors the pricing?
Yeah, we would do. Yeah, we would do.
And they're toothless tigers. They can't do a thing about it. They
Well,
just monitor it and say, "Oh, it's dearer." That's sad.
Yeah, very very difficult for me to know that. To be honest, that's just one area that I'm just not that up on. So I would be surprised, if I'm honest, mate. I'd be surprised if they were that toothless. I suspect they probably would be. They'd be as fair as they can get away with. They'd be as toothless as they could get away with being. The UK system is a pretty fair system, right across the board. It's a fairly well regulated system, and this is interesting because if we talk about the UK and the UK's position in the world, one of the reasons that Philip Hammond, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, has gone over to China and said that. In fact, no, it wasn't him. It was a guy called Lord Patton, and Lord Patton was talking about China and Hong Kong. I don't know if you've heard recently, but there's been a few demonstrations in Hong Kong to do with deregulation. I think I'm not exactly sure what it was to do with, but it was to do with the powers that Beijing are trying to impose on Hong Kong, because obviously Hong Kong used to be a British colony right up until 1997, I believe, or somewhere in the 90s anyway. But at that time, the UK was twice the size, and this surprised me, was twice the size in economic terms as China. Now, when we fast forward 20 years, have a little guess how big China's economy is in comparison to the UK.
Now,
yes,
I'd say it's probably reversed. It's probably double.
Yes, so it's 6 times.
Yeah.
So China are 6 times greater in economy than the UK in economic terms. So we've gone from 2 times bigger to effectively 6 times smaller in the space of 20 years. So China really has had a surge. Now, this guy Lord Patton was saying that when he was asked what kind of pressure can the UK put on China when it comes down to Hong Kong. His answer was, well, there are other things that are more important than the size of your economy and the power that you have in the world. And I just thought, what an awful politician's answer that nobody's going to buy. You know,
what were those things? What list of things did he actually
well,
put up?
well, this was back to this jumped from your question about the regulators.
Yeah,
One of the things that the UK, the British people are really proud of, and the politicians are really proud of, and the Constitution is proud of, is how fair we are, and how we're seen in the world as kind of upholders of justice, and the birth of democracy and all this kind of thing. Um, but everybody listening to it knows that nobody cares about that stuff. In fact, do you know what? This is a lovely Game of Thrones reference. I've just got to the end of the first series, and Drago, I think his name is the one that was married to the Dragon Lady. He got killed, and his army have left him. And they basically said, when she asked where the army had gone, they said that they're not going to follow a leader, they're going to follow power, and that is the bottom line. And that's the world over. But the world doesn't really
sad
care
but
about,
true.
they
That's
don't
right.
care about fairness. They don't, the world doesn't really care. Many, the powers that be, if you like, not the people of the world, but the powers that be don't care about fairness. They care about the financial position that they are in, which is why we are destroying the planet. It's got nothing to do
Yes,
with.
in the world of capitalism, nice guys run last. It's pretty
Yes,
much that simple.
exactly. And it is really interesting. And it is, I don't know, if you read too much into this, it would be quite concerning, because the UK, right up until, maybe 80 years ago, it was a force to be reckoned with. And, going back to World War II, it was really the UK and the United States. So anybody that took on the UK and the United States was much more likely to have a decent tussle on their hands than they would have now. And it again brings us back to the UK leaving the EU. And it's incredibly worrying when you kind of hear some of these people talk about, we've done it before, we can do it again. People don't seem to realize the standing that we really have. They seem to sort of like think that the UK is almost the same, has the same standing and the same power and the same size that it had in its glory days. But we're not that nation anymore.
No, think
The
again.
colonies have gone. The Hong Kong is another example that has gone, and the world has changed hugely. And China have done it in a very, very clever way in many respects, because they've managed to do it economically. And also managed to kind of understand that land does matter, size does matter. There's no kind of question that if you get it right and you can govern your land mass correctly, the products that you can effectively produce, and the commodities that you can draw from, and the natural resources that you can draw from, are going to put you in a pretty powerful position. Now, obviously, Russia are an example of when you don't get it right. But if the world is changing, then you look at it. United States and the UK are both democratic societies, but China's not, Russia's not, Japan, I'm not sure. I don't think they are. I wonder whether we are actually getting a genuine change of political position as well as everything else. But the bottom line to all this, and the point to all this, is that the UK has got no right or reason to be as proud as they should be. I think they're burying their head in the sand if they think that they are going to wield any kind of significant power or influence just because people respect the fact that we are a just nation.
Sad but true, mate. That is exactly the case.
Yeah.
There's no room for sentiment in business, and the world runs on business these days. There's no two ways about that. It's a global economy, as we all know, and going to China, and in terms of change of politics, I suppose, you've got to really take China as I don't know, it's a mixed bag. It really is. The amount of people now liberated from communism, and we're really well into the capital system. is kind of changing that within their own country as well. You know, their policies are still very strict, of course, but there seems to be a breakaway into the capital world, as I see it,
Yeah.
and the amount of cashed up and strapped up people from China, certainly in Australia at the moment, who are buying and have been for quite some time assets. That's quietened down recently because of governmental control, but in the previous couple of decades, that's been very much private investors rather than the Chinese government, for instance, who now own, and I'm not sure whether it's government controlled or private investment, but the major ports in Australia are controlled by Chinese.
Yeah.
The biggest coal export port in the world, which is Newcastle, which is where I'm from, is now leased on a 99-year basis to the Chinese.
Wow.
So can you imagine, therefore, if there's an increase in demand for coal out of China, whose boats get filled first?
Yeah. Yeah.
Duh. So that goes back to the point that you're making. You know, they've done it with the smarts rather than their muscle. You know, and exactly as Japan did in the 60s with the technical revolution. You know, that they brought to the world.
Yeah.
And now China are doing it with all sorts of things. You know, it's textiles, it's anything that's manufactured basically these days is coming out of China.
And this is the thing, the world order is changing, isn't it? And the UK effectively giving up their territories really does put them in a pretty weak position. And this is why I think again, back to the EU, it's a really stupid thing to do, to think you can go it alone. I think just to be part of a bloc in these current times is wise. And I was even thinking about the European army. One of the reasons that the UK wanted to leave the EU is that they didn't want this European army. But you start looking at all these different corners of the world and thinking, well, maybe you do need a bit of protection. Don't get me wrong, I'm not an advocate of war at all. But there's enough countries out there that are, and it does suggest that the protection might be necessary. And to be part of a wider group would be much safer and much better, and start looking slightly more inward than looking so far afield as trying to kind of get some deals with China and America. And the other thing about it is that if the UK sides with China, which they probably should do economically, they are going to put America's nose out of joint. And if they side with America, then they could well be effectively slitting their own throat economically, because they're not on the side of the country and the nation which is booming and doing the best. So you really want to be on the side of Asia right now, and it the world order, as I say, is changing, and I wonder whether the state of communism actually does come into play. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with communism, because I don't know enough about it. But who knows? Who knows where we might be in the next 100 years?
I'm sure there's a beautiful medium in between communism and capitalism somewhere, but nobody's ever found it. That's for sure.
Well, maybe they have. Maybe they have. They seem to be on both those aspects right now, don't they?
Yeah, well, that was going to my point. Yes, maybe they are. Maybe they're on the right track. We'll see. Mate, I've got new candles that I probably should have a look at.
Great.
So I shall so do. Look, and I'll go again. I haven't got a whole lot of interest right now, but anything can happen at any time, and that can happen in a 30-minute candle. So let's take a look at them and see what I can see. We'll start with the euro. And that resistance level, of course, that we spoke about on the euro is upon us, or price has been upon it pretty much half the day. And another rejection of this level. I don't know. I really don't know, to be fair. I can see an untested daily and weekly pivot. Well, the weekly pivot's not untested, but the daily pivot certainly is. And when they're together, you tend to get a backup of price. on the euro in particular. We've got end of month today. We've got FOMC tomorrow. We've got NFP on Friday. I don't see this cross moving too far from here, to be fair, in the next 24, 48 hours. Maybe as a result. Depend, of course, on what the Fed say. Not so much in what they do, although there is now some talk that they're back on the tightening trail. I don't know about that. Certainly, I don't think anybody's expecting them to raise interest rates tomorrow. That would be a shock, as would a cut, of course. But it will be very, very interesting to see what the Fed has to say and what they're looking for in, I suppose, Q3 of 2019. Anyway, we will see. But for those reasons, I think we're going to see euro dollar hang around here a little bit for the next 24 hours or so. It seems to be in a landlocked position until it gets above this level and or below here. So that's where I see it. I pretty much see it between 112 and 111, 30, 40, something like that for the next 24, 48 hours. That could, of course, change very quickly, but that's how I'm approaching it. And or to go back to if there's a potential trade at all, I really don't see it until we hit support down here. There's a massive trend line coming up through here that's been hammered and hammered and hammered and hammered and hammered. I'd expect price to get back there at some stage, maybe even look to break there. If it does, that may provide a trade back to here, but we're getting very, very tight into this range. So really, I haven't got a whole lot of interest, mate, to be fair.
Okay, mate.
The Aussie. Yeah, interesting, the Aussie. And going back to what I said before, end of month had a bad second half of the month, clearly. In fact, quite a bad second half of the month. And if you go to trend, I fail to see, an intermediate trend. I can certainly see a long-term trend, which is down, but the intermediate trend is really unclear to me. So all I've got to go by here really is the support level that I see that's very, very clear. It's bang on where price is now, really, I suppose, or thereabouts. We've been unable to sustain any selling below that level for any amount of time. We had this big spike here. I wish I could remember what that was, but I think I called it fake news at the time. And I think it was to do with coal. And someone somewhere in China said that Australian coal will be banned from this port and that port.
Oh, I remember.
Sorry?
I remember that.
Yeah. That's what that was, and it was completely fake news. So if you have a look at this range around about the 70-50 mark or wherever it is,
it's awful, isn't it? We got to navigate all these numbers, and now we got to navigate fake news as well.
Yeah, well, exactly right.
My goodness.
So that it completely, I could see that instant that it was said, it didn't make any sense at all because of what I just told you. The major coal port in the world is controlled by the Chinese in Australia.
Yeah.
Why on earth would they ban Australian coal? Made absolutely no sense. It was garbage. Anyway, that said, we continue to attempt to break below 70 and we continue to fail. And again, I see exactly the same thing as I've seen here and here and here and here. Here we are again. It's exactly the same scenario. The only difference I see is that the highs are getting lower, which tends to indicate to me that perhaps the buyers aren't as keen to get above, obviously, that level there, but the buyers aren't as keen to shun away from this 70 level anymore. And that may just give the sellers enough at some stage to drive through this level and keep going. So, whilst it's under pressure, I absolutely get that. It continues to deny this level below 70. And why would I expect that to change? I don't. I really don't. So all I'm really looking for is a reason to trade this back to this area here. I don't see it at the moment, but let's have a look at the latest 30-minute candle and see what I see. That's the hourly, of course. I need to kind of rearrange things here a bit. That line doesn't do anything for me anymore. That one probably will.
Yeah, that looks pretty good, doesn't it?
That's a bit better. But do I see a reason to trade here? Look what I've got. I've got support, resistance, resistance. It's all very, very tight. And similar to what I've just said on the euro dollar, this may well be waiting now. We've had the Chinese news. That was it. Why it rallied off just before, I don't know. Speculation, I suppose, but that soon came back to reality. And that's where we are. We're exactly at that level where that candle closed. So outside of something else before FOMC, again, I don't see this moving too far, unless, of course, that Chinese news is strong enough to drive this down here.
Well, it certainly
I
looks
don't think
like
it's
it
going
is right now, mate. The FTSE is coming off fairly significantly from its highs, not so
right.
aggressively at this stage, but the next 20 minutes, if price is anywhere near where it is right now, that does suggest that the Chinese news is filtering into a little bit of fear in the market, certainly
Okay.
from this end.
Yep. Cool. Not beyond the realms of possibility, of course. It's just from a technical point of view and the news that's upcoming. Again, this seems to be in a fairly tight range to me. Euro pound. We're still trying to get through that daily pivot. That trade that we're in, we're just on entry, just a little bit in profit there at the moment. This is obviously the tail of the tape for this one, the daily pivot today. If it can break through here, then I think we've got a pretty good shot at getting some nice profits. If not, I can definitely see it going back to this trade line here, or trend line here, as I said. What's the 30-minute candle telling me? It's telling me it's trying. That's all it's telling me. It really needs a substantial close below here before I can call this a potentially good trade. It really has to do that. And as you can see, it's been rejected a couple of times already. And that would not surprise at all because it is a resistance level from a couple of days ago as well. It's also got a little bit of form back over here. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see this bounce. My hope is that it obviously doesn't bounce beyond that trend line that we see. 30-minute chart's not doing anything for me in terms of if I wasn't in this trade, what would I do? I would do nothing at this point. What I can see, I suppose, distant values, one there. There's probably one through there that may offer us a bit of protection as well at this confluence area. That's probably a good point to look for a short if you're not in this and you want to get short. Look for a false break in that area. So break above, consolidate, back below, retest the confluence of weekly pivot and trend line. That mightn't be such a bad short. In particular, if you get a close below the daily pivot with one of these 30-minute bars, that'll be okay. But there's nothing there at the moment. Aussie yen, look, surprised me. Well, not so much surprised me, disappointed me, because I was very keen on getting back into this trade that we were in from a couple of weeks ago, and we closed last week around about here somewhere. I was waiting for this to go a little bit higher and give us a nicer, I suppose, higher low. What I was really counting on was the monthly pivot moving tomorrow up to here somewhere, and that's where I would have been looking to get back into the short. It would appear at this point in time as though that opportunity has gone ski. But again, stranger things have happened. We do have a double bottom sitting here on the 4-hour chart. If this were to turn into a higher low, for instance, then that could still be the case. But on the 30-minute chart right now, it looks to be too far gone for me. I can't find a way to trade that. Maybe later as a false break off this trade line. That's a possibility. So again, Back up here, retest, maybe long, but yeah, I'm not that keen because I am bearish across to start with. Another disappointment for me, but not for others, Ash included. I again was waiting for an entry signal here from my trading strategy perspective, and it simply hasn't come. There is nothing there that absolutely excites me as an entry candle. So it looks as though I've missed this one, and so be it. Though I can't do anything about it now. It's Gonski. Cable, looking interesting, has now broken to the high side. That won't hurt the euro pound trade, one wouldn't think. But where do I see this going? Well, it's pretty clear to me that that's where it was going, and that's pretty much the basis of this trade on euro pound. I thought if this could break through here, it would get to this level. I said it had to hurry up if it was going to get to the confluence area. Maybe that's a possibility. I don't know. Rather, you would think that we're going to be somewhere in this vicinity by the time, although that's a fair way away. So who knows? I mean, it's not fait accompli yet. We haven't really broken the level. So I still, again, unless I get a retest here, am unable to trade it. So again, I've missed the boat. Pound yen is interesting, and the 30-minute chart is a little bugger now because of that candle, the current candle. Had I not, oh no, I wouldn't have. Had I not, or had I looked at this earlier, I would have thought potential here for a short. But when I analyse it a little bit further, I see a level here that I wouldn't trade through, or I choose not to trade through. So we're pretty much at that level. So, and pleasingly, I didn't enter a position here because I would be in awful state of affairs right now. This is looking fairly much as a false break of this trend line. So not happening. Aussie Kiwi. Yeah, look, I was the guys in the show last night were having a good old yak about Aussie Kiwi, and can totally see where they were coming from. They're looking for, I think they even are in longs. I'm not sure. Maybe based on this scenario here. In fact, more than likely based on this scenario here. I looked at this morning and I saw this bar and I thought, oh, that might be a reasonable opportunity to get in here. But then I thought, well, am I really bullish at this point? And my answer is not yet. And I know I've said that twice in the last day or so, and it's kind of come back to bite me. But I'm thinking a bit deeper retracement, to be fair, and I'm seeing this level here as that retracement minimum, minimum to there. So I'm not just ready to jump into that long yet. If I miss it, I miss it, and that'd be number 3 I can chalk up as a miss. But I'd rather be sitting out looking in than the reverse of that. So I'm just happy to wait on this one, I think, on Aussie Kiwi. From a 30-minute perspective, can I trade it short? Well, I can if I'm crazy. I can't trade into this level, but I could if price were to come back up here. But even again, it's very, very tight. You can see this going sideways at a rate of knots. And really, I'm not that keen to trade it, to be fair. Again, there's big statements coming up this week that will affect both of those currency pairs, China not excluded. And we've already seen that. And perhaps that's, the reason that setup is not performing as it probably otherwise would. Euro Aussie has taken off on the back of that Chinese news, obviously, and looks to be settling in just below the monthly pivot. Do I have any intention of trading that? No. And I'm running out of opportunities here, Ash. There's not a lot going on for me, as I said.
Yeah.
A little bit of a trend line coming up through here. That's the 4-hour chart. reading into that and going back to what I said before, end of month, this has had a pretty bad last 2 weeks of the month, as you can see, and has gone, I suppose you'd have to call it into trend, into a short trend, but really, have we? It's getting towards the bottom of a range, isn't it? If I just expand that a little bit more, it doesn't look like a range there, but certainly does on the smaller time frames. Or does it? Maybe the bigger time frames. Yeah, that's more like it. I don't know about this one. I really don't. You can see the level here, similar to the Aussie, really, that we were talking about before. It keeps hammering this level, which is 124.28 as I've got it, and it keeps failing to get through there. But again, going back to what I said before, if there is to be profit taking at month end, then you would think this is going to rally. But if you look at the technicals, it's again just bound by pivots. It's really locked into a pivotal area. If you wanted to go long, that is, it's clear of them if you're thinking short. But if you want to trade long here, it's just too dangerous. And I do want to trade long, short term, maybe even just to the monthly pivot would do me. Let's have a look at that on the 30-minute chart. Okay, well, there's some hope. There is some hope. If we can find a reason, not really a reason, if we can find enough energy to get back above here and retest it, that would give me some hope of getting to the monthly pivot. Then when I look at this, it looks very channel-like. Sorry, guys. I can't fall in love with this either. It's already broken it and retested it. It's just a bit ugly for me. Mate, I've completely lost interest, I think. Yeah. One more. EuroCAD.
No, EuroCAD was one I was interested in a couple of days ago, but it would have gone completely against me if I'd taken this trade. This
What were you thinking?
Well, I was looking for the shorts in this one. And I'll show you why very, very, very briefly. Not anymore, by the way. But this is what I was looking at initially with EuroCAD. I suppose maybe this monthly level was not given the respect that it probably deserved. But I was kind of looking at a little line going along here. Maybe not that convincing, but because it's a bit scruffy around there. But when we bring it to the 4-hour chart, it looks a little bit more surefire. It looks a little bit more certain, and that would have put me into a position from this point to look for the sell-off. But now it's gone through that line. I think kind of all bets are off. It looks just a little bit too scruffy now for me to look for any trades in this one. If I had to pick now, I'd be looking for upside.
Do you think oil looks to have something in the tank to me? Pardon the pun. And you're calling oil short still, aren't you?
Well, not so much. Yes, I suppose looking at the pattern, it would suggest to me that there's a short-term move to the downside in oil. I think we are at a pivotal point of resistance on the monthly chart, and depends. I'm not sure whether the head and shoulders pattern will actually come to fruition, but it could. But I think given where we are in the cycle with oil, given the fact that we've had an unrelenting move to the upside, that is a fairly imbalanced move to the upside, and a rejection already of this upper line, given the fact that we've got this weekly bar as well, which does suggest that there could be some downside. Maybe the Donald Trump intervention with sanctions on Iranian oil could have an effect, but and the fact that we look like we've broken down this level of support. So yeah, that would suggest to me that lower prices in oil would be a lot more likely than they were previously.
Okay, yeah, I'm on the fence. I'm having it on the fence day. I think
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And to be honest, I wouldn't trade EuroCAD now. I mean, if I'm looking at it, it looks much more like it will push higher than lower. But it's very scruffy, and it's not really a chart that I'd be that keen on taking any trades or taking part in. I don't like it at all.
Fair enough, mate. Then we'll just agree to sit on the sidelines. I think I'm happy to do that until probably FOMC, unless I see something outstanding tomorrow. I'm probably still on the sidelines.
Well, I think that's a fair crack and a fair call, because when I look at the FTSE right now, the FTSE does look like it is in an area that it keeps wanting to retrace from this point. Looking right across the board, we've got Euro Stocks 50 here, moving. Let's move this gap to the gap lower at that particular point. Maybe not that. Maybe not that a significant chart. We really have to look at the others, but and it could still push into this area before getting lower. But I think that is probably finding some weakness. The CAC is at these all-time highs here, so that may well start to find a bit of weakness. China 50 near the highs there, and it's just pulling back this month so far. The Dow Jones, which is probably more reflective of the FTSE, is another one which is at a level of a potential resistance here, and we might be just waiting literally until tomorrow, because as this monthly bar closes, it would suggest that we get some retracement. But whether we get it instantaneously or not, I don't know. But that's at a point of potential resistance up there. Sorry, that's the DAX. The Dow Jones on a monthly is also at these all-time highs. The maybe that's not so significant. The Nikkei. Not so clean, I suppose, but if we drew a trend line from these lower lines, probably easier to see on the weekly chart. Drew a trend line from these lower lines, then we also see that the Nikkei could well struggle at this point. It might be a breakthrough, but it may well end up being a bit of a false break, depending on where that line actually exists. The Nasdaq had some pretty bad numbers yesterday out of Alphabet. So it's broken through the all-time highs, but that is in a state of overbought territory, and also a fairly unrelenting move to the upside would suggest that if a downside was to come, it could be fairly sharp. S&P all-time highs, little bit of weakness as well yesterday, but again at an all-time high point. And that brings us really kind of right back to the FTSE. So, and actually looking at the FTSE with a bit of detail, the hourly chart right now has proved that this area, with slightly more detail with pivots, has proved that this area is providing some resistance here. Closing below the daily pivot with a bar like this would suggest that we would see these lows again. But I agree with you on the FOMC. Are we likely to go through this point before tomorrow? Not so sure about that, but I think that there is enough weakness here that would suggest that we are going to be testing and bashing our feet against the lows. And it's every chance that the Fed could push it in either direction from there. This might actually become a bounce point or a break point. But considering the highs and right across the board with world economies and world stock markets where they all currently sit, then I think the risk to the downside is probably a bit more palpable. And we have to couple in the fact that we've had some pretty weak Chinese data today as well. So that's much more likely to suppress the market than buoy it. So the takeaway for me really is that the FOMC is probably going to be the ultimate driver.
Yep.
Certainly, whispers from what I've heard so far is that they're probably going to be a driver to the upside than downside. But let's just see what happens, because there is a bit of nervousness going on here, and we couple that into the fact that the dollar yen continues to weaken down here. So maybe some protection is being put into place just in case. And we also go back to our gold chart, and gold is also moving in the right direction now, back to the upside. So I think that there's a few indicators out there that people are a little bit nervy. Whether they take their money out of stocks or just pile a little bit into protection while keeping hold of stocks is another question. But FOMC certainly seems to be the thing that's in focus.
Yep, and no surprise there, because everybody waits to see what they want to say, what they're going to do. it will potentially give us trend for the next few weeks or so. In particular, if they go from dovish to hawkish, which
Oh gosh,
may
yeah.
well be on the cards.
Yeah. And do you know what might be the worst thing possible is that they just don't really tell us anything.
Like usual.
Like usual, yeah. Could
Cut
be
and paste.
yeah,
It
could well be back to that kind of scenario.
Hope not. Hope we've got some direction.
That would be good, mate. That would be good. Okay, well, let's wrap it up and back same trade time, same trade channel tomorrow. But for right now, let's give it the to quote you, the bye for now, and
Yep.
get back in the hot seat again tomorrow.
Righto, mate. Have a good one.
Okay, you too, buddy. You and everybody out there as well. Hope you're in some of the trades. I did put a trade call out for dollar yen, which is going in the right direction, and I've put one out for gold as well. It's 12.82 for some upside. So there are some trades out there as well for you guys to choose from. For right now, we will continue to watch the charts, obviously overnight, and if there's anything else, then we'll be posting them. But yeah, as I say, for right now, we'll see you tomorrow.
See you guys.